Well, welcome to the No Show. My name is Andrea Edwards.
My name's Tim Wade.
And my name is Joe Augustin. Welcome to a show that seeks to help you think a little bit. And if you're not going to think a little bit, at least you can borrow some stuff to pretend you thought a little bit. We try to also bring on a guest that makes life a little more interesting for all of us. And on this occasion, we have a person who does the kind of thinking that I'm very much in awe of, the kind of stuff where you think about what's good and then you try and design for what's good, and then you just go ahead and do it. I wanted to find out his age before this because I could then say our guest is a 72 triple D. But I don't know what his age is, but the triple D stands for Design, Deliver, and Delight. It's my pleasure to bring on Graham Harvey, who should come on now to fill in the rest of the blanks as to who.
99.
99 triple D. There you go.
Yeah, about now in my 70th year. So.
Oh wow!
And behind the mic for 35. So.
Well, behind the mic, as in what, on radio?
No, as in speaking. So, yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, I just lost a little bit of esteem there with me, but sure.
Yeah. But one of the reasons Graham's part of our global community of professional speakers, and one of the reasons I really wanted to bring Graham on is we haven't met in person, but he's one of the people that I've really sort of built a relationship on social media because I have great respect for his opinions, his ideas, and he's always sharing stuff, and he's definitely aligned to a lot of what I think. Sometimes he's a little bit more bold than I am in what he shares. And I know you pay the cost sometimes of that. But yeah, it's really great to have you here, Graham. Do you want to give us a bit of background and let everyone know what you're all about, apart from being a Perth boy?
Thanks, Andrea. Yeah, I originally from New Zealand, came to Australia in 82. And so I've actually lived in Australia for more than I have in New Zealand, but still call New Zealand home. As much as I try, still can't barrack for the Wallabies, so the All Blacks will always be my team. And I'd always been in the travel industry during the 70s and early 80s, came in 82, and set up a company here in Western Australia looking after about 20 New Zealand companies. And then in 1986, I purchased a franchise for Success Motivation Institute, which still exists. It's based in Waco in Texas, and I had a team of about 16 people working for me in 86. And then 87 came around. You might remember Bloody Monday, when the market crashed and my business went west, and as did most of the assets. So then sort of worked on my own and pretty much been on my own ever since. Had a slight sabbatical in 2007, we moved to Albany on the south coast of Western Australia, which is 400 km south of Perth, and had 6 years CEO at the Albany Chamber of Commerce and Industry, which was probably the most successful regional chamber in Australia at the time. And been back doing what I love. I still continued speaking and coaching while I was doing that, but since 2013, back doing my business coaching and training keynotes. These days, COVID's probably sort of shifted the pendulum a little bit. These days, sort of 50% of my business would be one-on-one coaching clients who are typically business owners or senior managers in organizations. And the rest is sort of corporate training. The keynote side of things, that's a very small part of my business these days. The reality of it is that PCOs tend not to look towards old male, pale and stale boomers. They want sexy looking people with sexy sounding subjects on the stage. So I'm a realist. I accept that. And as one of my good friends said to me a couple of years back, he said, Harves, they want style, not substance. And he said, you and I are substance speakers. So anyway, I think there's an element of truth in that. But anyway, I'll just get on and do what I do and share my thoughts and ideas with people that's sort of been gathered over many years. So we're back down living on the south coast in Albany, which is Western Australia's first European settlement, settled in 1826. So coming up for the bicentenary of Albany in a few years. And So I do a fair amount of travel, mainly in the southwest, across to the Margaret River region, which I'll be back over there again next week, working with clients up in Perth, also with clients. So I sort of do the Albany, Perth, Margaret River triangle, and that's my territory. I don't hanker for aeroplane rides anymore, and the least amount of nights I can spend in hotels, the better. After doing it for so many years, it's like the novelty of hotels and aeroplanes wore off a long, long time ago.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
So that's it in a nutshell.
Yeah.
Well, I'm a fan of bread pudding, so old, pale, and stale is very important for that.
And custard, but let's not go there. The Albany is a gorgeous part of the world, absolutely stunning down there.
Yeah, it's no, it is a nice part. We have it's one of the rare places in Australia. We have no traffic lights, even though there's a population of 38,000 people. We have no traffic lights. They're just roundabouts, and there would be a major political coup if anyone ever decided to put a traffic light in Albany. So we have things like our traditional Saturday morning farmers market, which is rated as one of the best in Australia. The produce is all grown by the people. So the people who are selling it are the people who have growing it. With great beaches, there's islands offshore. And compatible with my Kiwi genes, on a day like today, it's probably 10 to 15 degrees cooler than Perth. So I'm very happy about that. I enjoy visiting your part of the world, which I've been to many, many times. But I got to tell you, I struggle with the heat and the humidity of Singapore. But love the place. It's one of my favourite cities.
Well, what's 20 degrees between friends? So a little bit about the format of the show. We will get down to the heart of it when we talk with Graham about his area. But we start off by talking about the news and the things that have been happening in the world. We're not generalists. We're specific about the area that we're interested in. So Andrea leads us off in that department. She does all the reading and typing. We just look at the emails and go like, ooh, that's a lot.
Yeah, but at least you read sometimes, right? All right. So we'll get stuck into the news that really struck a chord this week. So the World Inequality Report for 2022 came out this week. Did you guys have a chance to have a look, at least at the executive report?
Yep,
I did.
I know, Tim, you were involved in some conversations about it on social media as well. The findings, I don't think anyone's really surprised, especially not us, and it's at the core of our global challenges right now. But I wanted to just provide a few statistics. All right, from an income perspective, the richest 10% of the global population currently takes 52% of global income, whereas the poorest half of the population earns 8% of it. But when it comes to wealth, the poorest half of the global population barely owns 2%. The richest 10% owns 76% of all global wealth. And basically, the report is saying that inequality is a political choice. It's not an inevitability. Easy enough for you to say, right? But basically, income and wealth inequalities have been on the rise since the 80s. And I found this statement around the 80s. The 1st of January 1970 is when the climate crisis is measured from as escalating. But if you look at the industrialization of food, the climate crisis, basically since the 80s, everything's going up, and surprise, surprise. But it's all based on the deregulation and liberalization programs that have happened in different countries around the world in different ways. One good piece of news this isn't good. Inequality has increased within countries, but in the past two decades, global inequalities between countries have declined. So that's a good news, right? Nations have become richer, but governments have become poorer, which means the totality of wealth is now in private hands. And I think this is one of those things in the report that should make everyone sort of pay attention. If governments have no money to spend, they can't tackle things like inequality or the climate crisis. So it's a really important thing. We know that billionaires increased their worth during COVID. Since 1995, billionaires' wealth has risen from 1% to more than 3%, and 2020 marked the steepest increase in the global billionaires' share of wealth on record. So it's not even remotely going in the other direction. Two key points that were raised, and then we can have a chat about it. One, equality they didn't include equality in the 2018 report. They've included in this. So women's income, total income from work, and this is labour, not the unpaid stuff that women do the majority of. In 1990, it was 30%. 2020 today, or 2022, it's 35%. So we've only increased by 5%. If we were in a truly equal world, women's pay for labour would be 50-50. The other thing is climate inequalities, and we've talked about this a lot, and we talked about it when we were talking about COP26, but it's a critical part of addressing the climate crisis. So basically, global income and wealth inequalities are tightly connected to ecological inequalities and to inequalities in contribution to climate change. The top 10% of emitters are responsible for close to 50% of all emissions. The bottom 50%, 12%. So they've got all these other recommendations that we've got to start making the wealthy polluters pay and contribute tax so that we can solve the climate crisis. So it's a very wide-ranging piece. I recommend everyone reads it. To me, if we don't address this, so the inequalities of climate change, if we don't address it, the poorest people in the world will have to pay the highest cost. They have to pay more for energy. They're in countries that are going to suffer. We're seeing the right-wing politicians in Europe talking about putting up walls, keeping them out. So the people who created it are not going to take care of the people who are suffering from it. So it's a very comprehensive and powerful report. Thoughts?
Well, what I'm struck by actually is a kind of baseline assumption that money going to that the inequality automatically means a bad thing. And before you all kill me at the same time, here's what I'm thinking, right? What happened this past couple of years was a climate of real fear in terms of the markets and everything. That we went through a lot of that, right? And it's happening in almost every one of the markets that I'm exposed to. I'm doing work not doing work, but I'm participating in the crypto market, for instance, right? And in the time of fear, it's not a redistribution. It actually is a time of accumulation. The wealthy who are very brave, are going to pick up a lot, and they're gonna usually increase their share when things are fearful. That's just the way it's kind of always been. But there is also something that I think is interesting, as in we've had governments doing what they're doing or not doing what they're doing. And then we talk about the shift of wealth towards private, like private wealth. Is it not possible that we could have a situation where there are more billionaires who could do something, about things? Could we not do with more Bill Gateses? Could we not do with more Warren Buffetts? And in the crypto space, I'll tell you that there are a bunch of people who, it's a space filled with a lot of scum, but it's also filled with a lot of people who have come back and decided to do good things, right? There are people who made the big fortunes, and they're investing in projects to do with health, and they're trying to do good as well. So I'm curious about this, as in if it's possible, I don't know, if it's likely, but if it's possible that we have more wealthy people, but also with an intention to do more good with it, wouldn't that be a good thing? Could it be not a good thing?
Well, it depends on, what's their priority. Bezos wants to go to space. Musk wants to go to space. It's kind of like, it's not really the priority that we need as a global society. Not
everybody's going to be aligned that way, but there are going to be people who want to try and at the same time, we have these projects that are trying to change the way things work. There's some very big ideas which could not take off. I think a government wouldn't be able to justify taking a moonshot, so to speak, and something that might change the way plastics are taken care of, for instance. Just too big of a crazy idea. But if they have that capacity to do that now, and because of that extra, wealth that they have now to do it, they could now discretionarily do more about that. I mean, I know it's very hopeful, and I know the natural assumption is, well, you got to be billionaires because you know how to exploit situations. But you know, I'm also a little troubled by the automatic assumption that it indicates that it's a bad thing.
I'm automatically assuming that, but when I have a look at it, there was a couple of different things that really stood out. But just to go on to Joe's point about, is billionaires having it a bad thing? Look, the good part about having somebody that is wealth in the hands of an entity that is not defined by geographical boundaries, but that entity can operate globally, is an interesting one. So then you've got people like the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation that were doing a lot of work in Africa to try and eradicate malaria. And nobody else was really being bothered with that at a truly large global sort of level. So when that sort of stuff happens, that's interesting. But when it's a sort of a genitalia comparison competition with getting into space, then it just seems to be a little bit on the peculiar side. That said, the thing that was most troubling to me, there was three things that when I read the report that really sort of stuck out. One was the quote, "Inequality is not inevitable; it is a political choice." Mm-hmm. And that really sort of came out and went, huh. And then, so that means because the governments are making policies that are aligning with individual acquisition. The other thing that sort of whispered to me without me going into the numbers at all, but looking at some of those graphs, is if individual wealth is going up and government wealth is going down, it just sounds like it's being channeled out of government coffers. It's like people are being taxed, and then that's going into individuals, and it just smelt of something untoward. And it's the nicest way I could possibly say that. And well, then
if I could just add to that. I mean, just so that, you know, like I say, it's been a couple of bad years for most governments. I don't think any government has done particularly well with COVID. So, you know, if we were talking about where we would expect wealth to go at a government level, it should very well go down. What I'm saying is, yeah, there's some things that you would read on that and go like, absolutely, it sounds terrible and exploitative, but what really happened? I'm just saying that.
Yeah, fair enough. That's a fair enough one with COVID, with regards to going into their coffers to help, you know, to help people. That one's okay. But the thing about, you know, Singapore wanting to build a dikes, for want of a better description, around the country to stop sea levels rising. Well, not to stop sea levels rising, but to stop rising sea levels from impacting the country. You know, that's going to require a lot of money. And for other countries that aren't as small to be able to do things to tackle climate change is going to be real and significant. And as Andrea said, one of the things coming out of it is, with government coffers going down, addressing large-scale concerns like that. So then for billionaires to come in and go, I'm going to be the knight in shining armor that's going to solve this problem, it seems to be contrary to the nature of, which is what Joe was saying, of billionaire acquisition, and culturally across what we see as the society, as this sort of Western society, but really global now, of capitalism in a large sense. It does say to me, when I'm looking at this report, it does say that you know, our whole thing is about more for me. And when it says inequality is not inevitable, it's a political choice. We can point the fingers at government, but actually we're voting for the government that's usually got the best deal for our pocket. Usually, right? So in fact, we're perpetrating the whole thing. And the government goes, no, less taxes. I'm going to vote for them because that's better for me. I got more cash in my pocket at the end of the month. But really, that's the outcome of the report was we need to tax the rich. The thing is, everybody's okay with that until they become in the bracket.
Yeah.
And so as soon as you're in the bracket, you're going, I don't agree with that anymore. But we're okay so long as somebody else is getting taxed. And when we look at that graph of, you know, extremely rich people, actually, if you look at where you sit on that graph, I think the people on this call and a lot of people listening to it would be in the higher level. If you're listening to this, there's a good chance you're at the very high level of that graph. So we're basically voting to tax ourselves. And you know, it's usually when we'd say, well, no, I don't really want that to happen. I'm happy for billionaires to be taxed because I'm not a billionaire. But you know, so it's I guess my summary is I like what the report is saying. I just don't see how it can possibly be implemented, because the people that keep people in government are the ones that have the billions to fund various bits and pieces. And if you do something against me, I'll just get rid of you next election or before.
Yeah, but it always goes back. Why we're where we are today as a global society is because of what we've created, and what we've created isn't good enough. So Europe is the most equal of all of the regions in the world. And I think, you know, looking to Europe to shrink it down a little bit, right? We've got to shrink our lifestyles down anyway. So to me, it's all about that. And the richest in the world contributing to solving the problems. But hand it over to Graham.
Yeah, a couple of things. When you say it's like what we have created, I think it's effectively those who hold the power. It's what they have created. I was reading a report this morning from Robert Reich, who is an American commentator who I follow, and he's had some interesting things about equality, so it was very timely for today's show. It was to do with the ratio between CEO pays and worker pay. In 1965, the ratio was 21-1. In 1989, it had blown out to 61-1. Now, 2021, 351-1. Now, when you say about what we've created, that effectively was a result of decisions made to change the remuneration structure of corporate CEOs, primarily in the US, and it's basically spread like wildfire since. And it was basically changing their remuneration from a salary to stock options. So that effectively then put again, going back to what Tim was saying, ultimately people will do, somewhat cynically, people will do what's in their best interest. So that's where a lot of people sort of make their decisions from. So the whole thing was shifted to stock options. So therefore, the drivers of Wall Street became CEOs driving short-term profits over the next Wall Street quarter, which of course drove up their stock prices, which drove up their stock options, which has now created this blowout where the average rate, you know, CEO wage to worker wage is 351-1. You know, we've seen it here in Australia over the past few years. Average wage rates have basically been around about 2% annual, where corporate profits have increased on average about 30% per annum. So, I mean, it's just a complete distortion. I get into trouble a little bit because I'm not a fan of Milton Friedman, who years ago said that the reason for corporations to exist is to maximize shareholder returns. I think that's the root of a lot of the problem. I believe as a CEO that your first responsibility is to your staff, your staff's responsibility is to your customers, and only when you take care of your customers will you actually take care of your shareholders. But unfortunately, in many organizations, the whole thing is ass about face, where CEOs go, well, no, my responsibility is to my board and to my shareholders, and effectively the customers are just an interruption to my day, rather than realizing without the customers, they actually don't have a business. The interesting thing also is about this thing called wealth. Now, typically we're talking in these reports, talk about wealth in terms of dollars. I think one of the great things that's come out of COVID, and it's sort of tied up with this phrase, you know, the great resignation, where you know, people around the world, and I've seen some reports where up to 60% of employees surveyed have said they would leave their job tomorrow for higher pay. In other words, the loyalty factor is pretty low. But so what's happening is a lot of people are going, you know what, I've been laid off. I'm actually jack of working for, you know, particularly in places like hospitality and tourism, where I've sort of been at the beck and call of my bosses, where I've been told to turn up and on minimum wage and so on and so forth. And this great resignation has had a lot of people suddenly sit back and go, you know what, there's more to life than just earning a paycheck. So they're really doing an internal assessment of what's important to them. And I remember years ago, when I lived up in Perth, there was a the front page of the local newspaper, and it was a probably one of the top boys' schools here in Perth, and there were 3 Buddhist monks who were speaking to these boys, you know, obviously from the western leafy suburbs, all probably the sons of wealthy people, because you'd need to have a good paycheck to pay the fees to go there. But the headline that's always stuck with me, it said, the people with nothing talking to the kids with everything. And then the byline was, I wonder who's happier. So I think it's this whole reflection, and I think probably the fact that having been around the sun a few times, you get to the point where, you know, what really is important? What is true wealth? You know, having time to sort of play on the ground, play on the floor, outside in the grass, kicking the soccer ball around with your grandkids. I mean, that to me is wealth. You know, it's the old thing, you know, who dies with most toys still dies. And so I think this COVID thing is causing a lot of people to sit back and reflect as to what actually is important to them. So I think that's a positive to come out of it. But what's interesting about the incomes, one of the things that's topical here in Australia at the moment is when the government came out with its JobKeeper wage subsidies last year when COVID first hit, where effectively people were being paid pretty much $750 a week to stay at home, and well, it was a subsidy to businesses to keep their employees on the payroll, even though there was no job to go to. And what was interesting is that at the same time, unemployment benefits were also raised dramatically, and the poverty level in Australia shrank dramatically. But of course, the people on those minimum wages, they spend every dollar that comes in. They're not saving and stuff. So there was actually a positive boost to the economy because the poor suddenly had money in their pockets. Now, of course, the great debate is, well, we need to have a look at this because there's, you know, there are schools of thought that want to support this, what they call a living wage, which is not unemployment benefit. It's actually an amount, again, coming from the government. So going back to Tim's comment, effectively that's only can do that by raising taxes. But the actual beneficiaries of having a living wage are, in fact, the middle and upper class, because it's people spending money at their respective businesses. But for some reason, it seems around the world, it's poor people deserve to be poor because they didn't get off their ass and earn an income, and it's their fault that they are poor. And the reality of it is, in most instances, poverty is not a choice. They are victims of circumstance. If you're born on the wrong side of the tracks and you're a third-generation welfare recipient, you know, you've got hell's own chance of getting back up into the middle classes and stuff. And last comment, which I thought was very cynical the other day, and also probably underpins a lot of what we're talking about. It was a cynical meme on social media, but again, a lot of these memes are steeped in reality. It said, the poor pay wages, the middle class pay accountants, and the wealthy pay politicians. And I think there's an element of truth in that comment.
Yeah. I mean, this is one of those topics that we could talk about
forever.
Yeah, and you know, and have different views. I mean, I think taking government out, financially out, like you were talking, for me, it's universal basic income, right? Is actually a part of the solution for the future, especially with robotics, automation, you know, like less human need to have jobs. So what are we going to do with the people? And so, I mean, just that in itself is a huge topic. But should we move on to COVID? If anyone's got wants to make any comments, got any suggestions, whatever that we're talking about, jump on. So COVID. So last week we were talking about it, and basically we're all in agreement. We've got a couple of weeks. Let's hang loose. I think, did you guys feel the lack of frenzy around COVID this week? It wasn't as bad as the week before. You got
the article certainly supported the view of don't panic, we don't know.
Yeah, it was kind of a bit of a relief, wasn't it? And one of the articles, it was in The Economist, I think, the BioNTech boss. So I think, let me read his name, Ugur Sahin. So he's the guy with his wife who invented the mRNA vaccine, which is of course Pfizer. Yeah, he seemed a bit ambivalent about it all and basically said, may need a tweak. We can get a new version out by 2022, but as long as you get 3 shots, you should be fine. So he was cool, calm, and collected. And I don't know, I like those guys. I think they're very cool. But then the CEO of Moderna, he was a lot more foreboding, and he basically said there would be a material drop in vaccine effectiveness, and the WHO basically said that Omicron poses a very high global risk. And of course, stock markets were impacted, which I'm sure you noticed, Joe. So we've seen lots of things going on. So in the UK, moving to their plan B, which is obviously having a lot of pushback, but Omicron is expected to become the dominant strain within weeks over there. And it makes me obviously wonder if they'll be hosting a Christmas party at number 10, which of course they will lie about. You know, we've got countries like Denmark introducing restrictions. India's
I thought they'd already had it, Andrea.
No, that was last year. They've got obviously another one coming up this year. That's been another funny side of the news. Well, no, some people don't think it's funny, but amusing. India's got multiple cities now which are reporting its first cases, and they're very scared about a third wave like the last one, and whether or not the natural immunity in the community is going to be strong enough. Australia basically thinks that Omicron could be a blessing in disguise because while more contagious, it seems more and more that it's not as bad. But of course, again, missing the message of the viruses, they continue to mutate. But Barnaby Joyce...
Can I just understand that one? So is the idea that everyone will get it, their bodies will resist it, it'll be fine, and then we're good to go with any other variant? Is that kind of the thinking?
Basically, we shouldn't be overwhelming the hospitals because it's not that bad, right?
All right.
Yeah, so but we don't know that. We don't know that for sure.
Yeah.
No, if it's true, it's good, but we're not there yet, right?
I think basically you need to be jabbed, and then you need that one to go past you, so your body can fight it, and then you're all good to go.
Yeah, basically. And Barnaby Joyce, Australia's Deputy Prime Minister, who he's leader of the National Party and not a man I like very much. He picked up COVID in the UK. He's now quarantining in the US, and I would just like to offer him my thoughts and prayers. So we are still in a bit of limbo.
What did your prayer consist of?
Excuse me, I have a little pet snail here that just shriveled up and died.
I've got my canary in the coal mine that just died with that comment.
Yeah. So we're still in limbo. Probably got another week. It's an evolving story. What about you guys? What were you picking up around COVID?
Well, the thing about Omicron for me and about us in Singapore right now is I don't know what we're going to do. As in, like, let's say we get to the point we go, like, Omicron isn't that bad, right? Are we going to do what the parents used to do with the measles parties, right? You got a kid with measles, we'll bring everyone over so we can get all the kids having measles before they realize how dangerous that was, right? Because in terms of what actually makes sense and what science says should be a good thing based on our vaccination rates, the moment we establish that Omicron really isn't as bad, in terms of all the outcomes, we should purposefully, infect ourselves with it. We should do that because that's the thing that's actually going to protect us and make us not invincible, but at least, it's going to reduce it basically to less lethal than the flu. Right, and that would be the actual thing, and I was wondering about the difficult task ahead for the government to do that, right? Because that really would be what you should do. Here's something. Well, like right now, if I was in charge, so this is me putting on my parent who created Santa Claus for the kids.
Okay, just before you say that, Joe. If Joe was in charge, so Joe's views are not necessarily the views of the No Show or anybody else on the show. Go ahead, Joe.
If I was in charge, at this point, if Omicron kind of crept into Singapore, I might go like, okay, we can, let's not worry too much about that, because if I knew that for sure that it wasn't going to be as serious, that's the one that I want to have. Like, if you could choose the COVID, you're going to expose yourself to. It sounds like the choice would be, I'll have an Omicron, thank you very much, and would you mind some peanuts, right? Yeah. So that's the kind of idea that I have. It seems almost like we should just get it in, get it around, and be done with it. Because when I thought about what happens in Singapore is if we don't get Omicron in and it isn't really spreading, if we manage to successfully keep Omicron out, and what we have is a country where if we have a breakout, it's going to be Delta.
Mm. And you've already got a Delta breakout, right?
So is there any evidence, Mr. Science Shirt,
yes,
that if somebody has Omicron, they're not going to get Delta?
Yeah, there is. Essentially, it's about you do get a whole virus exposure, which gives you resistance to it. So yeah, if you do get Omicron, I mean that's why your existing vaccinations are going to have some effect as well. Not as good as with the previous variants, but you're going to have some resistance. And when it's exposed to the new variant, the body learns. And then that becomes it goes into your memory, your T cells memory, and it gets called up again. So there is evidence that you will get less, you'll be less susceptible, not immune, but less susceptible to the future ones. Because like with Omicron, what's interesting is reinfection rates are actually high. So you're actually able to have had COVID and Omicron. You can still catch Omicron because it's different enough. So it's likely to be like the way the common cold is. We get the common cold, we get over it, we're well for a while, and then sometime down the road we catch the cold again. But if you have a disease, a virus that causes less disease, that's kind of a good thing.
I think people need to have a virus catching plan that involves either fasting or giving up smoking at the same time. Because you can't smell anything, so you're not going to be triggered. Okay, anyway, it does. What you said, Joe, kind of makes sense.
It's not the first time I've heard that.
But
interesting
I don't know.
thing.
I mean, go ahead.
Interesting. Looking at COVID from a slightly different perspective. I had an interesting chat with one of my coaching clients this morning who said, "I need to run this past you." He said, I'm having a real values dilemma because one of the things that's been mandated here in Western Australia is that you have to be double vaccinated to come the end of this month to dine at a restaurant. And also staff of the restaurant also have to be double vaccinated to be able to work at the restaurant. So he said, I have a major values conflict about mandating the double shot, double jab for my staff. He said, I encourage them and everything else. He said, but, basically throwing young people out on the street because they, by their rights, they choose not to have a vaccine, but in doing so, I can no longer employ them. And he said, I'm just having this real values dilemma because it doesn't sit well with me. So we had this long discussion and he felt better in the end. I said, at the end of the day, I don't believe you actually are compromising your values by having to lay people off because they're making the choice not to get vaccinated. I said, because effectively what you're doing is just honouring the legislation, like all the other pieces of legislation that impact your business. So I understand the internal dilemma that you're having. I said, but this is actually not a values decision on your behalf because your values aren't being compromised. You are effectively duty-bound to obey the law of the land, which requires your staff to be double vaccinated. But I said, at the end of the day, because you're a loving human being and he runs a very successful restaurant, I said, that's why you have people want to come and work for you because of who you are. I said, but don't feel trapped that this is a values judgment on your part. It's not. It's just basically implementing the legislation of the land.
Yeah.
It would be a tough one, though.
Oh, very tough. Yeah.
Well, I mean, as someone who believes in the vaccine, I'm also a vaccine hesitant sympathizer. I really feel for them because, like my sister is a brilliant mathematician and very scientific. And her conclusion is that it's too soon to do something with the vaccine. There's not enough evidence or whatever, and so she's not going to do it. She's decided not to do that. And she's made choices. She's a teacher in Australia, and so the rule: if you don't get vaccinated in Australia, you can't teach eventually. Yeah. So she's made a decision, and she's basically set up her own business online, and she's going to teach math online, and that's her new thing. But I do feel for those people who can't get over the fear of what is unknown. There's certain things that are unknown. There's certain things that are still, we do have to balance off the statistics. It is factually incorrect to say that there are no risks with taking the vaccine. We factually know that it gives you some a good amount of protection, but at the same time, there is on the flip side of it a bunch of stuff that does happen and has been reported to happen, and we're still learning a bit more about those things. So there's some things that there's some concern about, like cardiac events following vaccines. They're not. At scale, they're negligible, but we still buy lottery tickets even though there's a very low chance we'll win.
Yeah. Yeah, but it's like we've always said, we've got to agree on consensus and go in our direction together, and or we're never going to get to the end of this, right? So anyway, so probably next week we might have a little bit more, maybe even peer-reviewed research on Omicron. Until then, just stay cool. Let's see what happens. On the environment front,
it's Ohm, isn't it? Omicron, isn't it Ohm?
Yeah.
Okay.
At least we're all getting a handle on the Greek alphabet as it goes through.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Well, next we've got a pi, haven't we?
Yeah, we left out G for good reason. Yeah. XI.
Oh yeah.
Right. Oh
yeah. That would be not politically sensitive. So there was a wonderful story. I think it's in the Guardian, and the title is "Fish Whoops and Growls Recorded on Restored Reef." So basically, there's a reef off the coast of Indonesia. I just love the idea of fishes whooping off the coast of Indonesia, and it just centuries or decades of explosive fishing. So they're putting, what do you call it, dynamite into the ocean to get the fish to come up, and it completely destroys the coral, of course, but it can't regrow because there's nothing for the coral to sort of hang on to because it's just devastation. Anyway, so it's a really great piece, as well as which includes some recordings of the sounds of a coral reef. If you've ever been diving, you'll know how magnificent that is. Did any of you guys read the article 11 brands called out for greenwashing in 2021?
I did.
Yeah. Okay. So Eco Business, this is one of the environment publications that I subscribe to. Just really want to encourage everyone, whether it's Eco Business or one of the other ones, please spend money on these publications so we can support this really important journalism. But give me a favorite greenwashing from the
paper
article.
Bottle.
Oh, paper bottle. Yeah. So that was a Korean company that had a paper sort of cardboard around a bottle, and they cut it, and it's a plastic bottle underneath. Yeah, that was pretty good. Yeah,
it was basically my art project from when I was 7, right? It's the paper mache.
You're supposed to pull the plastic bottle out before distributing it.
Yeah. The Alliance to End the Alliance to End Plastic Waste is Singapore-based, not-for-profit, but it's backed by big oil and chemical companies, so Shell, ExxonMobil, and Dow. And they published a story on its website in November, which they've been called out on this article. And it's headlined, "Why Proper Waste Management is More Important Than Going Plastic Free." So basically, they're trying to encourage the continuing growth of the plastic industry. We just need to do a better job of getting rid of the waste. And to me, this is just a mind-boggling one. Yes, we do need to sort out how proper waste management, but we also need to reduce waste, because we know that the petrochemical companies are absolutely banking on continued growth in the plastics market, because it's actually one of the areas that they feel that there's an income guarantee. But the top of the pops for me is the carbon neutral hydrocarbons. So a new trend in 2021 is the oil and gas industry advertising that they're carbon neutral because they have offset enough that they can now claim neutrality. I would suggest that they need to go back to the beginning of when their companies first came into being. And once they offset all of that, then maybe they can start saying something like that. But yeah.
Well, you could plant 50 billion trees in the desert.
Yeah.
It's a bit like religious absolution. You sin during the week and get absolved on Sundays, and then basically defile the planet again next week, and then repeat the process on Sunday. It's just crazy.
So raised Catholic then, huh?
No, high Anglican. Yeah, same thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
That was always one of my takeaways. Yeah. So anyway, greenwashing, something we've talked a lot about. The final thing on the environment. So I subscribe to a whole bunch of newsletters, and this hasn't been published in The Guardian yet, but I'll share a link if it is. It's called "We're Locked in a Vicious Cycle of Wildfires and Polluting Emissions." And so basically, the last 12 months have been horrendous from a wildfire perspective, and we've seen it sort of growing. And this report shows that wildfires are intense, prolonged, and devastating. Yes, we know that. This year, they have caused an estimated total of 1,760 megatons of carbon emissions, just the world's wildfires. This is more than twice the annual carbon emissions from Germany, the whole country. The issue that this is creating, right? And this is why we've got to get on top of this stuff. It's going to become a feedback loop, basically. We've got rising temperatures and prolonged periods of drought, which is caused by the climate crisis, which is going to lead to frequent and more intense wildfires that in turn raise global greenhouse gas emissions and the concentration of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. And thus we are hastening the climate breakdown. So every year we see these fires getting worse and worse and worse. It's also adding to the time scale that they're moving towards. So all the time scales that we read, like people go, oh, it's 2100, don't worry about it. And it's like, no, it's not 2100, it's right now. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, I haven't got anything to add to that one, but I was just thinking a little bit about, a while ago, you're talking about planting those trees in the desert. And what I do think about is how much we're quick to sort of say like, what a ridiculous idea. Because I think when I first, actually, to be fair, when I read an article about that as well, I'm kind of divided. I don't go in thinking that you've definitely done some greenwashing there, because I think about the challenge of making a desert green, and I know it's one of those things where we just assume that's not going to work. We can't do it, but all ridiculous things start off as ridiculous. I mean, they all start off as ridiculous ideas, the big ones, right? And if for some crazy reason, if the ego of someone saying that we want to do something like this drives technology to say, you know what, let's make the Sahara green. I mean, it's kind of like, because you've signed a social check. You sort of said, we're going to do this, and maybe we can start doing it. I'm of that kind of thing, because it is vaporware, but so is a lot of Singapore. I look around Singapore, and you really think about what we've got here. Where Singapore is, if anything, we're just built entirely on an idea that we can do this, and then we did. Yeah. So maybe there's something to it. Wouldn't it be wonderful? I mean, if not the entire Sahara, just like those first 5 million trees, why not, right?
But the problem with this one is it's Saudi Arabia that's going to plant these trees, and they're still going to be pulling the oil out of the ground. So it's not like they're going to plant the trees and stop a behavior that's creating the problem. Yeah, that's kind of to me, that's the problem.
Well, the other major problem is that there's no significant water resources at all, and very little rainfall, which so all their water needs to be desalinization. And so they're going to have to create infrastructure to desalinate the water to pour on the 50 billion trees. I mean, you could show photos of people in airplanes throwing seeds out and going, how, we planted it. That's what we said we were going to do. We never said they were going to survive.
Yeah, like the ones in Dubai, right?
I mean, so it's, I agree with Joe. The thing about Singapore, the difference between Singapore is if they didn't do anything, everyone would have died. In other places where they make this promise, if they don't do it, it's a bit of a so what.
I think the difference is, Tim, that if you look at what happened in Singapore, there was a financial return on what was done in Singapore. To go and just simply plant 50 billion trees in the Sahara, because of the capitalist structure in which we operate in, unless you've got some, I forget the guy's name, he's that Dutch guy that bought several thousand square kilometers of Amazon forest.
Yep.
Yeah, and so effectively that comes back to the altruism of the billionaires that we talked right back at the beginning. It's like those sorts of people are the ones who are buying up the rainforest. They're the ones who are sort of likely to spend the money to plant the trees, because they're not actually looking for a quarterly Wall Street return on the investment of planting the trees. So we sort of come back full circle. Unless there is a almost an immediate financial return on making that investment, everyone goes, well, I'm not going to do it, because that's why it's the philanthropists of the Bill and Melinda Gates and the Warren Buffetts, of those sorts of people who you're reliant upon to take the initiative to do it, because of from a heart space, not from a financial head space. That's the challenge.
Yeah. All right. So some other news. So we were talking about the boycott of the Chinese Winter Olympics, and the US, UK, Canada, and Australia have come out and said they are boycotting, but only as far as not sending their government representatives, so the diplomats aren't going. China says to any country that boycotts the game, they will pay the price for their mistaken acts, so fighting talks. And Macron from France came out today. He just said, shouldn't be about politics. If you either want to do a complete boycott and send none of your athletes, or you come up with better ways of creating change. So, not surprising. And a headline to look out for in my weekend reads is called "A 975-Day Nightmare: How the Home Office Forced a British Citizen into Destitution Abroad." So this is part of the Windrush scandal. Did any of you guys have a chance to read this story? It's one of the long reads.
The summary would be no. So, good. But I understand this guy was stuck in Ghana and couldn't get home.
Yeah, it was a terrible story. I mean, a really, really terrible story. And he's been so harmed by this. You know, he lost a relationship with his children because his children just presumed it was his decision, and he abandoned them. He couldn't ring them because he didn't have any money. He was literally on the streets. He wasn't treated well by his family back there because he never knew them. He couldn't even speak the language, so blah, blah, blah. But it's a whole story, this whole Windrush thing, which I haven't paid as much attention to as people who'd be impacted by it, of course. But just government incompetence. They're not taking care of the people, but also how people's pain is funded from a government perspective. How lawyers decide that your pain is worth £10,000 and your pain is worth £100,000. And it's a pretty heartbreaking story. But another story of the week, complete opposite. An example of an arsehole in our world. Better.com CEO fires 900 employees over Zoom. Did you guys see that story? Did you see the video?
I did.
I mean, for God's sake, really? To me, in this world, like, really? Like, how does that happen? You know, we've seen. I think you're being kind.
I think you're being kind, calling him an asshole. It's worse than that.
Yeah, it's just completely detached from what's going on in the world. It was shocking.
Well, it's similar to that guy that took over the company that was it the EpiPens or shots in America, and basically drove up the price from $100 or to 750, or don't quote me exactly on the figures, but it was like. And at the end of the day, when he was interviewed, it's like, well, my company, I'll do what I like. Yeah, but what about the people that can't afford it? Well, that's their problem, not mine. I'm in business to make money, and if people suffer, well, so be it. It's like, yeah, just amazing.
Yeah.
I just can't get my head around that sort of mentality.
Yeah.
I can understand. So what's happening there is that people are selling themselves on the values conflict, on the ethical dilemma, and they're finding a way that gives them the get out of jail free card to be that kind of person, and it's not ethically right. So what we're having a problem with is the ethics of it, because by the rule books, it's the same as what everybody else is doing. It's just not causing the harm. You know, the EpiPens, for example, has an immediate impact because of the absence of significant alternatives.
Yep.
The better one, the guy just, I mean, these people are rewarded for results, which is why they get to these positions. My wife worked for a person very much like that, who I then advised her to record with her phone the conversations that were taking place. And this fellow in the better.com's, this was years ago, my wife was working with this fellow, but for the better.com guy, you know, his comment about you're too slow, you're slow, you're being a bunch of dumb dolphins, you know, because he was basically suspecting everybody of only working for a couple of hours a day from the work from home, and so he just fired everybody. And it just the way that he thinks about his own people. I mean, Graham, you're talking about the CEO's first job is to look after their people.
Yeah.
You know, this guy is displaying that the first job is not that at all.
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah, it's contempt for him, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's this dichotomy. You have those that are of the Milton Friedman School of Economics, where the primary concern is to maximize shareholder returns, and then you have the other, which is very much even like Richard Branson, like he said, at the end of the day, the most important people in his organizations are his people. So you sort of got that complete opposite end of the spectrum as to what's the most important activity. I think the upside downside, whichever way you're looking at it, for the likes of the better.coms, you know, I think the reputational damage that's created that organization, because you're going to have so many people going, well, why would I go and work for an asshole like that? Clearly, it's a company that doesn't give a shit about its people. So, so I think there's that reputational cost, because, you know, and that's why they have this sort of annual Employer of Choice Awards, and it's for those that enter those awards, it's very prestigious to be rated in the top 100, you know, Employer of Choice companies, because they are the people, they are the organizations, particularly at the moment, who are attracting staff. And the ones that don't take care of the people are the ones that are struggling for staff right now, because we have like pretty much a staff shortage all over the planet. I don't quite understand the reason for it, but anyway, that's what's happening. Certainly here in Australia, it doesn't matter whether you're an accountant, a cabinet maker, a hospitality, people are just screaming for staff. They just cannot get staff, and many are closing down because they haven't got staff to operate.
Yeah, it's a really interesting one, and it kind of goes to show how important the movement of people around the world is.
Correct.
Because it really is. It's like sheep shearers, right? You go in, you shear the sheep, and you go to the next farm. And we're seeing that on a global scale, and COVID has stopped that movement.
Correct. Well, Western Australia typically has between 30 and 40,000 international backpackers as part of our economy at any one given time. Well, they're not here. And they are the people who particularly serve the coffees and pick the fruit. And there's basically horticulturalists who are just ploughing in their crops because there's no one to pick them.
Wow.
Isn't that amazing?
And we're seeing in the UK, right? They've lost the Eastern European labour force, so no one to drive the trucks, no one to pick the fruit from the, you know, that people dynamic's been an interesting part of it. But I think next week Australia's opening up, and international students are one of the first groups to be let back in. Yeah,
back in New South Wales. Yep.
Yeah. So slowly, right? But it's an interesting one. But that better.com, I don't know, but we've seen, you know, the CEO of Marriott, when this first all broke out, the pandemic broke out, and he was crying, he was heartbroken, you know, and it was a really genuine sort of outreach of emotion and care for his people, to this point where you've got someone like that, like you say, with the reputational damage, but just the fact that we have leaders like that in business today who haven't got the message of this time. You know, this is a time of kindness, empathy, humanity. And then you see stories like that break, and it just, I think, you know, we were talking about, Joe, you were talking about the wealthy sort of stepping up. I think a lot of very, very wealthy people, and we've seen it, there was a fascinating article in The Atlantic a long time ago about Sheryl Sandberg, Mark Zuckerberg, and the rest of the sort of Facebook team, the MBA sort of leadership team of them, and their complete disconnection from the reality of life. Completely disconnected. And I think we struggle to comprehend that. And because we can't comprehend it, we're always in conflict with this idea of what we expect from them and what they can deliver. And I think it creates a lot of conflict because they're not capable of delivering because they can't see what we see. Does that make sense?
But I think it's understandable. I mean, if you live in a bubble where the thought of knowing where you're going to sleep tonight or where your next meal is coming from has never, ever been part of your life, it's understandable that why would it enter their thinking? Because it's just something completely foreign. It's a bit like me going, well, whether should I buy a 75-meter yacht or a 100-meter yacht? I mean, it's not part of my mindset, so I would struggle to cope in that space, you know.
I'll have to tell you, the 100 meters are a bitch to park. It's just horrible.
The marina costs go up after 87 feet.
Yeah. And those ballets, don't trust them, please.
Then the other thing I sort of look at is, it's a mortgage company. Better.com's a mortgage company. And their entire business is based on numbers, ability to pay. It's not about personal. It's not about feeling for the person. It's about show me the numbers. And
no, but they got a massive injection of funds recently. So the financial argument actually wasn't valid for this.
Oh, no, yeah, what I mean is it's the culture of the organization to be focusing. Right. It's computer says no. It's that sort of, sort of person. I mean, I was asked a number of years ago, I got a call to speak to the ultra net worth account managers of a major international bank. And the person from HR was saying, what we want is you to do a presentation for them. We want these people to give us their heart. So this was the relationship managers that worked for a bank with ultra high net worth customers. And the brief was, we want them to give us their heart, to be really attached to the financial institution. And I'm like, well, what's the reward and recognition structure? Is that changing at all? And no, it isn't. So if they don't perform, they're out. So why would they give you their heart? I mean, they're not, they're not going to do that. It's just like, it's a preposterous it's a preposterous request because you're not backing it up with your structures and the way that you're going to help them. And I've seen, I was in another presentation for a bank where I was brought in as the motivational speaker. And the first thing that the CEO of that particular group said is, look, they've left, they've gone, it's done. And if you keep complaining, you're gone too. You're welcome to take the door. You're welcome to walk out the door. None of this nonsense, blah, 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 blah. Anyway, Tim, come on up. I'm like, crap. Now motivate them.
Yeah.
It's interesting about Better.com being a mortgage company. A company that I refer to sometimes in my customer service workshops is Quicken Home Loans, which is now the number one supplier of residential home loans in America. And they talk about service on the lunatic fringe. They have a policy in their company that every email, every telephone call will be returned by close of business at the end of each day. No exceptions, totally non-negotiable. And even the CEO will say, even if you're unable to reply to an email me and I'll reply on your behalf. So you've got this other end of the spectrum where service to their customers is their absolute number one priority. And surprise, surprise, they've become the number one in their industry in the US. So you sort of compare that with Better.com, both in the same industry. One's obviously got, just different CEOs with a completely opposite mindset. Yeah.
All right. Well, should we move on to the theme? Time to play a higher game. So I'm looking forward to this. So like as we've been talking about today and for the last few months, the world's going through one of the great resets. And if we get it right, we have a chance at creating a future for our children and grandchildren. And if we get it wrong, well, who knows, right?
What?
Sorry?
Oh, sorry. I'm trying to talk to my kid without looking at it. I was doing some ventriloquism with very bad mic technique. So here we go. Right. I'll turn off my microphone.
All right. Anyway, so Graham Harvey works with his clients to help them play a higher game. And I think, while most of us can't or don't think we can drive global change, we can always manage ourselves. So, Graham, whether an individual, a leader, someone working in business, an entrepreneur, or in any other roles that we humans play in life, how do we play a higher game?
Great question. In fact, I think we've been talking, there's been several references in our conversation for the last hour about the differences by those who are playing a higher game versus those who aren't. So I guess I've been pushing the customer service barrow since 1986. And in more recent times, the commencement of my both keynotes and trainings asks I throw up a slide which simply has the logos of the New Zealand All Blacks, Apple Computer, and Harvard University. And my question is, what is it that these three organizations have in common? So there's general discussion about, well, you know, obviously the All Blacks play a pretty good game of rugby, and branding, and they're all well known, and so on and so forth. And then someone will come up and say, well, hang on, you know, they're all good at what they do, but I think one of the key strengths, which is the answer to the question, is that the success of those three organizations is underpinned by a very strong, what I call, culture of excellence. So if you look at the New Zealand All Blacks, they are the most successful professional sports team on the planet, any sport, any code, any country. If you look at their win-loss ratio since their first game back in 1903, overall it's around 80%. In more recent years, it's closer to 90%. So any team that comes up against the New Zealand All Blacks has got close to a 90% chance of losing. I have to admit that they have lost 2 or 3 games in the last in this last season. But anyway, in a normal year, they have a good winning rate. And then you look at Apple, which, you know, from 1976 by 2 young guys, both named Steve, operating from their dad's garage, suddenly turned this idea into what's now the world's most valuable company, valued at over $2 trillion US. If you've got a pencil, just write 2 followed by 12 zeros. It's a lot of zeros. And then, of course, you have Harvard that in 2036 will celebrate its 400th anniversary. So it's obviously been around a while. And as we all know, for companies to have that sort of sustainability over the long term, they're clearly doing something right. So you have this thing called what I call culture. So the definition that I have, and I'll read it for you because it really just sums it up, that culture is the why and the way that we do things around here. The cumulative result of the interplay between the organization's mission, or as I prefer to call it, a purpose, its vision, its values, and I tend to use principles, which is a little bit more encompassing of values and ethics and morals. The ethics, the norms, the systems, the symbols, the language, the assumptions, the beliefs, and the habit. In other words, I talk about that your culture really is your organizational DNA. It's your genetic code. It's the way that we do things around here. And of course, underpinning the culture are the values. And the values you could compare to the foundation stones of a building. I was working with an upmarket building company in Perth just last week, and I said the analogy of, do you know that you can build a flash-looking home, but after a few months you start to see sort of cracks appearing where the wall meets the ceiling, and suddenly there's a crack in the tile on the bathroom floor, and you know instantly that the problem is actually not to do with the floor or the walls or the ceiling. It's to do with the foundations upon which the building is actually sitting. And it's the same thing for organizations. So I talk about values as the foundation stone that support that culture, the filters through which the importance of organizational choices and activities are assessed, whereas ethics are more to do with the moral stance that help an organization decide between right and wrong. So together, the values and ethics provide the operating philosophies and principles that guide an organization's internal conduct and behaviors, as well as its relationships with customers, clients, partners, shareholders, and all other stakeholders. Now, interesting thing about values is that if I want to know what someone's real values are, I just simply sit back and watch their behavior, because ultimately it's our values that drive our behavior. We've all seen value statements nicely printed and framed sitting behind the sitting in reception or nicely laid out on a website. But one of my in my work is that the quote is that I use is that a value not lived is actually not a value. It's simply an aspiration, or worse, it's some sort of cynical marketing ruse. You know, a value to be a value is something that is non-negotiable, no exceptions, no correspondence shall be entered. It's something that's steadfast. And of course, what's been happening with COVID is that values are most tested when the pressure comes on. You know, there's a temptation to take a shortcut, to get this out the door, or whatever it is. But the companies that are really, you know, not only surviving but striving in this pandemic marketplace are the ones that are rigidly staying steadfast to their values, even though they are being tested to the nth degree to perhaps want to compromise or take some shortcuts in the implication, or not the implication, the what's the word I'm looking for? Anyway, basically adhering to their values. So it's because it's those values ultimately that determine behaviour. So in playing a higher game, it's really looking at analysis of what many of those values are, and I'd be certainly happy to pass it on to you, Andrea, for passing out to those that want access to it. I have a little exercise called a values exercise, which simply starts off with, and I say simple tongue-in-cheek, it starts off with 450 different values, and then it's a process of distilling those values down to the values that apply to us either as individuals or to our organizations. And then it's about the understanding, the agreement, and the adherence to those values by, you know, across the whole organization. So the values become part of the recruitment process, because you're not only looking people where the chemistry is right and they have the right skill set on their resume, but the most important part that I see in recruitment is that they share the same values as the organization they're about to work for. So as an example, going back to the All Blacks will tell you that there are far better rugby players not playing in the All Blacks than what there are. But of course, whilst they might be good at playing rugby, they're not particularly good at playing team. And that's the reason why they're not in the All Blacks, because playing team is about adhering to the values of the team.
Yeah.
So playing a higher game, it's this whole thing. So the game is called excellence. And the final slide of my workshops is, well, if not excellence, then what? If not now, when? And if not you, who? And so, I mean, when you ask that question, if not excellence, then what? Well, the answer to the what is obviously something less than being excellent. And I guess my question is, why would you get up in the morning and want to play a game that's less than excellent? Because there's so many lost opportunities in playing a mediocre game rather than an excellent game. So it's really helping businesses get real clear around what their values are. Because the reality of it is, every single one of us individually or as a family or as a business, we actually already have our values, but many just haven't taken the time to get clear on what they are. So many of those values have sort of happened by default. They've sort of been brought along by the business owners or the senior people of the organization. But when organizations do take the time to get really, really clear on these are our values, these are our non-negotiable standards, then the results that flow from that are quite extraordinary. The current Governor-General of Australia, General David Hurley, was famous some years back when he was head of the Australian Defence Force, said the standard you walk past is the standard you accept. So you might have a standard of doing something a particular way, but due to time constraints or availability of resources or whatever, on this particular day, you settle for something less. That's the standard you have just walked past. So by default, that lesser standard becomes the new standard for your organization, which of course is less than excellent. Tom Watson, who the founder of IBM, was famous for saying, he said, you know, how long does it take to become excellent? And he said, you can become excellent today. You simply have to stop doing less than excellent work. So that becomes a concept that gets embraced by everyone on the team. So I guess that's in a nutshell of the work. And of course, that then leads into what I talk about, my 6 senses of service, which underpins my design, deliver, delight workshop that Joe mentioned right at the beginning, where I look at service. So I talk about a great customer experience as being a combination of everything that your customers see, hear, smell, taste, touch. And of course, the big one is how do they viscerally or emotionally connect with your people, your products, and your services. So it's about being excellent across those 6 senses, what I call the 6 senses of service, because that's where the behavior takes place. And of course, that behavior is rooted in the clarity and agreement of the values that underpin the culture of the organization. So it's a choice point, as Jim Collins in his book Good to Great recognized in all that research. The great companies at some point in their history actually made the decision to be great. And it's the same thing happens with whether it's a small solopreneur like I, or a multi-organization like a BHP or a Mobil Oil or whatever. There is a point in time where the organization decides at what level is it going to play the game. And of course, my question is, why would you not play the top game, the higher game called excellence?
So, yeah. Do you think that there is a mindset, an employee mindset, perhaps? Because when those organizations decided to be great or excellent, from good to great, do you think that there was a team of people saying, well, what's our goal? This is what we're going to head towards, and to do that, we need to raise everything to this level. Do you think that there is a mindset of what is the least I can get away with?
Well, that comes back to, I guess, McGregor's theory X, theory Y, where way back in management history, where theory X basically was that all employees are lazy bastards and they want to get paid the maximum amount for the least amount of work. When in reality, the research is that most people are theory Y. They're actually turn up each day wanting to do an above average job, but often it's the environment and not having the resources to do an above average job. And I think that, so going hand in hand in deciding to play that higher game, leadership has to make sure that people have, so my definition of leadership is to basically paint the vision, employ the right people, make sure they have the skill set and the resources to do the best possible job, and then get out of their way and let them get on with it. But what stops so many people in organizations is not having the clarity of their role, the support of leadership, or the resources to actually do their job.
Be interesting to apply this to better.com.
I want to go back to the values piece, because I think, so when I first set my business up, it was all about creating the content, the messaging for businesses, right? So the values, the mission, all that stuff, right? So I really get the message that you were talking about, and then as a comms person, helping instill that within the organization, because there's no point creating the words if nobody believes in the words.
Correct.
But on the other side, having worked in the big global corporations, one of the things that I kept noticing is that people, I talk about it in my book a lot, but people are not anchored in their own personal values. They don't know what their values are, or they've forgotten what their values are, or they don't understand the importance of their personal values. And so I always say they always get knocked off. They're not anchored in it, right? So, and young people coming into a big organization, I watch them just completely change from the person that turned up. Within a year, there's a darkness in their spirit that wasn't there when they arrived, right? And it's not just their naivety dying. It's also just the influences around them. They weren't strong enough within themselves to hold on to who they were. Yeah.
Correct.
And it was such a, and I used to always look, I was always keeping an eye out for the young, bright-eyed kids and making sure that, oi, you're getting sucked in by the darkness. Don't do it. Keep hold of yourself, But I think for some reason we're not, self-awareness, who we are, what we stand for, what we believe in. We leave everything at the door, and we're moving in the world almost, it's as close to zombified as we can, right? But we're we're not just disconnected from Earth. We're disconnected from self. So
yeah, I think it comes back to that research that shows about, we're talking about also about wealth. There was one research that shows that the basic level of income happiness is about $75,000 where beyond that, you basically all your day-to-day needs are taken care of, where you have lots of people joining an organization, particularly in the younger years. I mean, essentially they are there, a lot of them driven by a paycheck because they need something to buy the food and put a roof over their heads. But there's an interesting thing about the culture. A lot of it's set, going back to Tim's question about who sets the culture. So one of my clients, they run down in the Margaret River region, they run a very big tourism organization. They have a big restaurant attached to it. So as an example of the culture of that organization, you can have a new member to the team, let's say 18 years old, working as a server in the restaurant. The culture of that organization is such that that server, even though they may have only been on the payroll for 48 hours, can basically tell the chef to cook the meal again. Now, classic example, they have a lot of family groups, and one of their favorite dishes for kids is their chicken nuggets, which are all made by hand in the kitchen from chicken breast meat, crumbed and everything else. On the wall is a picture of the chicken nuggets where the shade of the browning of the crumbs through the fryer is a certain level. Anyone in that team, from the CEO down to anyone on the team, if they happen to spot, say, some chicken nuggets at the pass that are either darker than the desired amount or lighter than the desired amount, they can refuse to take it, give it back to the chef and ask them to do it again. Now, imagine that, an 18-year-old kid off the street telling a veteran chef to cook the meal again because it's not done right. Now, that's the quality of that culture that is totally supportive and encourages that behavior.
Mm. Oh, there's two aspects to that. As somebody who was a waitress for many years to get myself through university, chefs are not the nicest people in town, so bravo. Second of all, a business that actually wants to represent its food is the same as the photographs on the wall. That's impressive because, you know, often what you see on the wall is not the slop that you get on your plate. So
correct.
Nice job.
Well, when was the last burger you bought looked like the ad on the outside on the display on the screen? Yeah. But so it has to be lived, particularly by those in charge. They are virtually the controllers of the culture. And you have, because you can't. So I always talk about customer service starts in the boardroom.
It always feels too far away from me. Because, you know, like, I mean, if you think about, you know, I work for Microsoft, right?
Yeah.
Its boardroom is so far away.
Yes.
To where you are sitting in Asia working for a company like that. So to me, it's in the camaraderie within the community. It's in the interplay between the hierarchy. It's whether it's a kiss up, kick down culture. If bullies are praised and raised. You know,
but I guess Graham's saying that if it's not in the boardroom, there will be a disconnect point, and there'll be a bunch of managers here trying to make it a great culture, but there'll be a point here where it's allowed to be crap.
Correct.
Yeah.
Whereas if it's boardroom down, it's really the DNA of the company.
Yeah.
Correct.
Rather than the clothes it's wearing.
Yeah, I mean, for me, Microsoft, when Satya came on board, I felt it from him. I always felt it from the leaders, but I really felt it from him.
Yep.
And it deepened into a more spiritual.
Correct.
So there was more spirituality behind the meaning of the culture of Microsoft when he took over from Barmer, and that was something that really, really resonated strongly with me, and people believed him.
Yeah,
it wasn't that Americanism.
Anyone taking over from Barmer?
No, but I loved Barmer. I thought he was absolutely amazing. I thought he was brilliant, and I think he's been judged very harshly. I thought he was. You know, he was him. He was him, you know, unapologetically. I've been in a very small room with him with his stick, and it's very noisy, right? But he's just him. And, it didn't always translate well out into the world, right? But Satya was, you know, I think leaders embody the spirit of an organization too, right?
Well, I mean, effectively, if you think of the culture of Apple, I mean, Steve Jobs was, by all accounts, not the nicest person to work with, but there was certainly no questioning around the clarity of his values. And, one of their corporate values is about, I haven't got it at my hands, but one of their values, all on their website, is about saying no. They know where their lanes are. And, of course, that was epitomized when he came back to Apple, 97, and after a few weeks got all his management team together and said, one of the reasons we're about to go bankrupt is because this organization has become so bloated. Since I've been away, our product line has grown to 350. Effectively, get rid of 340 and choose 10.
Yeah.
Now, of course, there were lots of egos and wealth and incomes attached to lots of people with those 340 products. But, he said, you can't be all things to all people. You've got to decide who we're best at. And so what we have to do is learn to say no to 340 and say yes to the things that we're best at. So that's a culture of clarity. This is who we are. This is what we do, and we don't do the rest of it.
Yeah, and it's a great. Oracle reached out to me once, and there was a event they were doing. What are they called? Evangelist roles coming up, and I can never work for Oracle. It's not that I just like the people that work for Oracle. I can't do the culture. It's too much machismo, right? And that came from Larry.
Absolutely right.
From being switched on to that, right? Yeah, but being switched on to the culture, and I think it matters.
Oracle should have been able to foretell that.
All right. Any other news that you guys? Thank you, Graham. That was great. Really insightful. And again, one of those conversations we could have all day.
Absolutely. Actually, just before you wind up on that one, I just think it's a good little call to action for those listening to really just sort of have a bit of a think about your values, personal values, and how they leverage or match, I guess, with the organization. Then think about your organization as well. And
but you're also your own, right?
Yeah, your own first. I think is just like.
Well, let's give some examples. For me, a value is I'm a person of my word. What's a value for you guys?
Well, I have 4 values. That spells life. It's 4 words. So it's love, integrity, flow, and excellence. So love is about empathy and kindness underpin all my decisions. Integrity is about doing the right thing, or always. Integrity is where my actions match my words, always. Flow is the marker for being responsible, on purpose, and on task and on purpose. And excellence is about doing the best I can whenever I can. And so and that's distilled down from 450. And the other thing, just finally on values, is that they also slowly evolve over time. So, as things change, so don't be afraid to change values. And mostly it's a tightening of the values the true evolution of values. Things happen, you go, we need to tighten up a little bit in that so you can tweak and fine tune your values in accordance with, I guess what the demands of the business, the marketplace, and so forth happen. So don't be afraid to do a, twice a biennial refresh of values and vision and those sorts of different things. Businesses continues to evolve.
Yeah, but you guys got a couple of values that are important to you?
Joe needs to think about
what
most people do.
I'm trying to think about what.
But it's important, right? So.
Yeah, no. For me, I think fairness is probably one of the big ones. I've always had a sense for justice, trying to think about what is fair, and I'm not necessarily. I'm also one of the pettiest and most vengeful people I know. I've had an entire voiceover career because I had a teacher who just thought I couldn't do it, and I said, "I'll show you."
Stubbornness is a value.
Oh, it is. It's a value, and it's the worst thing possible because I will not say die, and I will just, without saying too much about this. I'm engaged in a disagreement with the wife currently, which is on the smallest of things, right? I mean, the capitulation for me would be very simple to go like, I'm sorry. That would be all it would have to do to fix that. But it would mean that I would have to give up on this idea of being fair because there was this other thing about this particular exchange which I thought was very, very important to me, but I didn't want to give up on. So That's probably it. It's fairness, and values can serve us, and they can also play against us. And I think I paid a pretty high price for my values.
Yeah. So you need to learn the value: happy wife, happy life. You've obviously.
I just
missed that one.
Well, that's what Graham is talking about. Just walking past it, right? That is the thing you learn. I think the value or the solution or the strategy in life is to figure out what your values are and figure out the times when you can walk past and should walk past. There's some fights that are worth fighting for, and there's some fights that are never worth getting into. And when I learned the lesson, I'll tell you.
Yeah.
That's why there's a block button on social media. You just let it go sometimes.
Yeah. My husband and I have if it's important to you, it's important to me value. And it doesn't, and we don't pull it out very often, but when one of us pulls it out, the other one has to go, got you. I don't get it. Doesn't matter. It's important to you. It's important to me. So maybe that might help you.
That's cool.
It's the blue. Tim?
Yeah, I mean, I've spent a bit of time sort of whittling it down. I really agree with Graham's idea of that it is something that it's almost like when I was a teenager working out who do I want to be with from a relationship perspective. It was only something I could really kind of discern eventually. I mean, there were some things I could choose, but only going through a number of relationships and just going, nah, that's not what I want. And by knowing what I don't want, I figured out what I did want, and then I could sort of work it out a little bit. But so I kind of did that with some of the values. But when Joe said fairness, I just went, actually, that is one of mine as well. But if I had to choose 4, I wanted them. I came up with faith, family, fun, and impact, and there are some challenges in those because because fun can mean that I don't do a bunch of things because it's not fun. But impact means that I still have to do them if I want to make the impact. So there's some challenges there. And then I was thinking, justice, because I've often said if I were to be a superhero, I'd probably be a superhero in some corporate office, working out how to take out the bully. That would be my sort of my super. Like I'd have all these sort of setups to get rid of the founder of Better.com. I mean, it's his company, but it would be to take out people like that, because that was just the thing that sort of irks me, is this sort of bullying by power.
Yeah.
But
in terms of evolution, it's interesting you say fun, Tim, because my life basically. The F originally started off as fun, and then it evolved to freedom. And then, because I've been doing a lot of work in the flow space, it's become flow, which is so that's just a simple example of. But I had to do it with F because otherwise it wouldn't have spelt life, and I was a bit attached to that. So anyway.
Well, I wanted 4 Fs. But I couldn't come up with one for impact. But the fun actually at one point was fitness, and then I just went, it's not really my value. I mean. Yeah. I've got a treadmill that I don't use. If it was my value, I'd be. So it's an ideal, but it's not really what I live.
Yeah, well, that's I was talking about. If it's not lived, it's an aspiration. It's not a value.
Yeah,
but that's a really important point. It's the core of the core of how you live your life. Right. That's what a value is, right?
I mean, overeating is one of my values. Overeating.
It's the indulgent. It's another I with impact. Yes, indulgent.
Oh, there you go. There you go.
All right. Any other news, quirky news, off the cuff stuff that you guys have picked up? I've got one great story. I love this headline. You guys
do it.
No?
Oh, I'm mindful that I'm holding you back and the kids from Christmas fair, so I don't want to tell a long and winding story. I heard about this catfish story from the UK, which really got me. It was where someone was the idea of catfish, right? Someone pretends to be someone else, and then they lead you along with relationships and all those different kind of things, right? This particular catfishing story ran for 13 years. Someone led someone to believe that they were someone else for that period of time. But when you look at the twists and turns along the way, it's just amazing. It went as far as to have that person in the fictitious character died, then was not dead, was actually part of witness protection. You know, and when he died, there was actually a Facebook group that was set up as well, where some 30-odd people came together to mourn his loss. It was a bizarre story as to why would someone bother to do that. And the perpetrator was someone who at the time was only 13 years old, and just the cousin of this poor woman. And for whatever reason, had so much darkness in her that she kept it going for all these years. So all this information came out in legal documents and the suit and stuff like that. But yeah, it was just the longest con game with no particular good reason.
Yeah,
wow.
Definitely not someone anchored in their values, right?
My mother invented a brother once.
Oh.
I mean, she was an only child, and at school she invented an older brother. And then all her friends wanted to meet him. And then she shipped him off to the army and got him killed.
Oh dear.
That was a bit dramatic, but
so the Prime Minister of Finland is a lady called Sanna Marin. I think she's the youngest female Prime Minister in the world. Anyway, there was a headline: Finland's PM sorry for clubbing after COVID contact. Now, she didn't do the wrong thing. She made a mistake, all that sort of stuff. But I just like the idea of a Prime Minister clubbing. I think that's really cool. And I want to move to Finland. Was
that clubbing as in dancing or clubbing as in fur seals?
Didn't cross my mind as well.
I pictured her dancing.
Oh, okay, cool.
Yeah. I don't want to.
Shows where our mind goes, Tim.
Yeah. No, it was good. And then the final thing is, what's keeping you distracted at the moment?
I have opened the cover to the place called DeFi in crypto, and it is mind-boggling. Every single thing that almost every single bank does is being turned into code and runs at the speed of light. And you see companies, or at least ideas, come and go, evolve and move. And in a matter of days, you see the result of whether or not the greater economy or the greater community has thought that was a great idea. But it's crazy. I've been working with things where the interest rates, the average, they call this it's an annual interest rate, but it's expressed in a number that takes 3 lines. I mean, it's a very large font, obviously, but just crazy numbers. It's ROIs of 5 times, in a few days, and it's just wild. It's just crazy. And at this stage right now, everybody's kind of saying bad things about it because it sounds like a bunch of really drugged up people on cocaine doing crazy things. But I think it's a little bit like the financial markets in real life, as in like something's happening in the financial world as well that we don't fully understand all the time. But there's a bunch of people trying to figure out how to make a lot of money from it, and not just make money, but also provide some good from it. So DeFi is going to change the way people get loans. Are going to be able to afford things. Communities are going to be able to fund things because of DeFi. But right now it's just this crazy, way above my head in terms of understanding the whole thing. But just knowing what happens under the hood, it's very exciting.
Well, you make me feel really good, Joe, because I started reading it and my eyes just glazed over. So to hear someone of your skill in that mindset, I feel a lot better. Thinking, how on earth am I going to get my head around this? I mean, I sort of got the principle, but start to scratch below the surface and suddenly go, I'm out of here,
Yeah, no, it's trying to say to someone that you have to understand the entire banking business.
Yeah,
and now you have only 2 minutes to make a decision.
Yeah.
So first of all, just you talking about whatever you're talking about doesn't make any sense to me. But are you talking about a book?
No. Oh no.
So what
I'm talking about crypto. I'm talking about cryptocurrency. Cryptocurrency. It's an area of cryptocurrency.
Okay. So it's a new area of cryptocurrency, or it's like a centralization.
DeFi is an abbreviation. What does DeFi stand for again, Joe?
I think it's just definance. It's just it's like we're talking about decentralized finance.
Okay,
where,
gotcha.
What happens is that the idea is someone who's in charge of making loans or whatever it is, instead of that person being a real thing, it becomes code. Somebody creates this thing that's in charge of that, and that creates a loan structure.
So it's the ultimate removal of the middleman.
It is. So when you were talking about better, that actually is something like what the world might be like. So as horrible as it is, it sounds like a terrible thing for the people to lose out on it that way. It's coming anyway, as in it's going to change the way the world works.
It's the algorithm of money and how you can get it, which also will mean that the poorer people of the world and people without great access to technology are once again going to suffer, right?
Well,
but the most important question here is, how do you spell DeFi? Is it D-E-F-I?
D-E-F-I. So it's D-E capital F-I. So
anyone's looking for this?
Capital D-E, capital F-I. It allows it's a system that allows customers access to financial products directly on a decentralized blockchain network without having to go through, like Graham said, without having to go through middlemen or brokerages, which theoretically should make them, the banks, either a lot more or those financial institutions more profitable because they don't have to pay the middlemen, or the product's cheaper, which could help the poor.
So the thing about this is when it's run properly, or that's why it's such an egalitarian idea, because it's the idea of it is to take power away from central control. So DeFi literally runs without government intervention. It cannot interfere with that. It doesn't have a bank involved in it as well. And even if a VC, for instance, is involved in DeFi, they cannot influence, they can't change what is actually there, because it's about code. It's about how this particular digital finance product is designed to work. So it is actually in many ways, it's going to democratize finance. It does make someone who has maybe just 300. It's always going to be a scale. If you have absolutely no money, you look on the outside looking in, and you go like, oh, I can't participate in this. But at the same time, it's going to set up things so that it will be possible for like things like microloans right now. For me, it's always been bizarre how microloans work and the interest rate of microloans. If you're looking for a microloan, DeFi might give you a better solution than microloans.
I can have a look. All right.
The challenge, of course, is that governments need control over the finances. And so out of everything that has been transformational, internet, everything else over the last couple of decades, this is the one that impinges most on the sovereignty of a country and its currency, and as a result has the biggest risk of roadblocks going up from a legislative perspective. And that's why it's such thin ice in a sense. It's the whole crypto world has that same challenge, really.
All right. So obviously
I've done a lot of study with Buckminster. I've done a lot of study with Buckminster Fuller's theories. And one of the things that Bucky was, there's obviously a lot of investment now in solar, but he said one of the biggest problems with government not wanting to embrace solar is because no one's developed a meter between the sun and your roof. So again, it's like, where will government take its slice of the action? And I agree with you, Tim, that's going to be the biggest barrier to it, because there really is no option for government to take a slice of the action in DeFi.
Yeah, but then we were talking earlier that governments are basically losing all the money and it's going into private hands anyway. So, all right, let's have a look into it. We can maybe finish the chat next week when we've got a little bit more intelligence. Well, me, obviously. Tim, what's keeping you distracted?
First of all, a stupid news story, and that was a camel beauty contest has been rocked by Botox allegations and a Botox scandal for camels.
What's happening? What's happening to the world?
Yeah, this has been Saudi authorities have got a crackdown on the camel beauty contestants in Dubai, and
is there a podiatry section in this contest by any chance?
It's hilarious. It's so ridiculous. So, but anyway, yeah.
Just reminded me You just reminded me of a terrible story, which I won't go into, about the French Foreign Legion and the camel selection. But it's a whole different story. I won't even go there.
Yeah, that one sounds like one that needs a beer and a bar, and so that everybody can drink to forget, which of course is why they joined the Foreign Legion in the first place. The thing that's keeping me distracted, I guess, apart from scanning, which I think I was doing last week. Was I scanning last week?
Yeah, you were.
Okay, so just to update Graham, I basically wanted to clear out the storeroom of all these papers that I've been storing for millions of years. And so I sort of set up a bench with my mobile phone and the Genius Scan app, which is a fabulous app, just sitting there scanning all these papers and throwing them out. Of course, I could have just thrown them out and not scanned them, but I figured I'd been keeping them for 20 years for some reason. But instead of reading them all, I just scanned most of them. I had a bit of a browse. So I did a bit of that this week. And the other thing I've been doing is catching up on a few episodes of Foundation on Apple TV, which is Isaac Asimov's sort of sci-fi super series from millions of years ago that Apple have finally turned into one of their big TV shows that they did. So it's quite beautifully done. A bit slow, but at the same time, really, really quite deliberate and really nice. I like it.
You didn't have to say slow. You said Asimov.
Well, that's what I mean. Yeah, I guess it's in no way abridged. But nice. Yes, Asimov. Okay.
All right, Graham.
I always find this time of the year a little bit daunting because it's almost like my head goes, "Oh, it's too close to Christmas to start sort of prospecting and making sure that there's some stuff in the book for next year." And so then you sort of, what am I going to fill the day with? And then I'm still finishing my second book, and so it's probably not so much distraction. It's almost a little bit of lack of daily direction, because it's not as though you can sort of pick up the phone and then book or something in, but whatever. So there's a number of things that, in terms of that, I've only just started looking at it, but also going to Apple TV. Tim, is the new Peter Jackson Get Back, which of course is the 6 hours of the Beatles. I watched an interview with of Steve Colbert interviewing Peter Jackson. So it's interesting stuff. So nothing specific distraction other than the fact probably a little bit of lack of direction, which is typical this time of the December. Is obviously just it's too early to sort of start 2022, but give it another 3 weeks, I'll be back into it. So. Yeah,
it is. You're right. It's a strange time of year. I've got to rush off to the kids' Christmas party. Well, it's not called Christmas. It's a multi-faiths, community. Okay. So it's something else. But and yeah, just like living in Phuket, I was just said to Steve, if you want to, one of my kids wants this fantastic guitar, and I'm like, if he wants this fantastic guitar, we've got to get it. We've got to get it into the country pretty quickly, And I ended up doing a lot of research and finding somebody in Thailand who actually has this guitar here. So,
cool.
But that's what this time of year is, right? It's just that, But Steve and I, no gifts, none of that. And I'm still trying to finish Versailles, which is the story of Louis XIV, I think, which is on Netflix. And yeah, it's not brilliant, but I love it anyway.
Don't lose your head over it.
No, there's no beheadings in this.
Oh.
Scene. Yeah, it's no beheadings.
What a dump cut. Oh, sorry. Okay.
Yeah, that's it's like the English sort of versions of those sort of things. There's a lot more blood and gore. Yeah, there's torture and stuff, as there should be, but it's the sexiness isn't as sexy as you see in whatever the other British one was that came out last year.
Downton Abbey.
No, Downton Abbey didn't have any sex.
I don't know. You were watching that for so many times. I thought about.
No. It's like no. It's just beautiful, just peaceful. I just needed brain peace. All right, so let's wrap up so I can head off to this party and do the right thing by my children. But Graham, thank you so much for joining us. Really, really appreciate it and appreciate your insights. And Tim and Joe, always a pleasure. We're doing our last show next week for the year, and the fabulous David Lim has agreed to join us, another news junkie, and we're going to talk about retirement. There you go. So maybe the crypto conversation will make sense to that as well.
Good. Unless it all goes belly shape, which means nobody's retiring.
Well, yeah, right. But anyway, all right. So thanks for joining us, everyone. Really appreciate your time. And we'll see you next week for the final show for the year. All right.
Thank
All right.
you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Graham.